I never intended to stop at the off-highway motel, but the storm brewing overhead was relentless, a furious dance of thunder and lightning demanding that I pull off the lonely Nevada highway immediately. My headlights carved pale cones into the dense sheets of rain, illuminating a rusty roadside sign that cheerfully proclaimed, "Off-highway motel, fun awaits." Its faded, peeling paint showed an unsettling caricature of a smiling clown whose eyes followed me as I slowed down, almost pleading with me to reconsider. The lot was empty, save for a battered pickup truck parked suspiciously near the office. Flickering neon lights outlined rows of room doors, each adorned with different clown faces that twisted oddly in the watery glow. Shivering, I sprinted toward the lobby door, my jacket already soaked through. A distant, hollow laugh echoed behind me, high-pitched and brittle. I whipped around, heart hammering, but saw only shadows dancing under swaying bulbs. I told myself it was just the wind, just nerves. Inside, the lobby was even stranger. Porcelain clown figurines crowded every shelf and table, their painted grins frozen in grotesque delight. The air reeked of stale smoke, old paint, and something sour, something metallic. A man stood silently behind the counter, his features gaunt, his expression blank. A crooked name tag pinned to his shirt read Marvin. He didn't speak, only slid a rusted key across the cracked countertop, room number 17 etched into the warped metal. His eyes lingered on mine for too long, as if searching for something hidden deep beneath my skin. "Storm will pass," Marvin finally rasped, his voice sounding more like sandpaper than words. "Just stay in your room after midnight. Guests sleep better if they don't wander." Before I could question him, a loud crash echoed from behind the door to the back office. Marvin didn't flinch. He only smiled, a smile far too wide, his teeth yellowed and uneven beneath dry lips. "Clumsy guest," he muttered unconvincingly. Grabbing the key, I hurried out of the lobby, eager to put distance between me and Marvin's unnerving gaze. As I sprinted toward room 17, lightning flashed violently, illuminating a large, tattered clown figure standing beside my door. It hadn't been there moments ago. Its eyes, dark and hollow, stared directly at me. I froze, my breath catching painfully in my throat. Then suddenly the clown toppled forward with horrifying speed, crashing to the ground inches from my feet. A scream ripped from my chest, harsh and desperate. From inside the room next to mine came the faintest whisper of laughter, icy and mocking. I shoved open the door to my room, locking it frantically behind me. The decor was nauseatingly festive, the walls splattered with peeling wallpaper, depicting smiling clowns juggling bright red balls. Only as I stepped closer did I realize, to my horror, the paint splattered across their costumes looked far too real to be artificial. Deep crimson, rusty, and dried. My pulse quickened, bile rising into my throat. Thunder cracked again, rattling the flimsy window pane. I dared a glance outside into the downpour and saw Marvin standing silently in the middle of the parking lot, face upturned, rain cascading down his cheeks. Beside him, shadows moved, shapes without substance, emerging slowly from the storm. I stumbled back from the window, breath ragged. Behind me, the ancient radio on the bedside table crackled sharply to life, a distorted sing-song voice humming from the static. "We all smile here, waiting just for you." My skin prickled, cold sweat slicking my back. The voice giggled, a childish, malicious sound, before cutting abruptly into silence. But in that heavy quiet, footsteps began softly approaching my door. And then, slowly, deliberately, the knob began to turn. My heart slammed into my chest like a frantic, trapped animal as I watched the knob twist, slowly, back and forth, teasingly gentle. I backed away, eyes darting wildly around the room for anything to defend myself, finally landing on a chipped porcelain clown figurine sitting ominously beside the bed. I snatched it, clutching the cold, brittle form, ready to swing. The door rattled violently once, then twice, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side had grown impatient with their game. A distorted, high-pitched giggle drifted beneath the gap, taunting, sinister. Then silence. I stood frozen, breath shallow, the only sound my pulse pounding furiously in my ears. Cautiously, I approached the door, listening for any movement beyond it. After agonizing seconds passed, curiosity won out, and I placed one trembling eye to the peephole. Nothing. The walkway outside was vacant, rain pelting down harder, forming rivers on the cracked pavement. My relief was short-lived. My gaze drifted downward, drawn by a sudden movement near the bottom edge of my vision. I staggered back, nauseated by what I'd glimpsed. On the walkway, directly beneath my doorframe, a muddy trail of footprints, large, misshapen, barefoot, had paused, as if their owner had stood perfectly still, watching, waiting. And right where those footprints ended was a single clown shoe, brightly colored yet tattered, splattered ominously with dark red stains. "Leave," I whispered to myself, panic rising to consume me whole. "Just get out now." I sprinted to the bedside, grabbed my drenched coat and reached for my car keys, but they were gone. My pockets were empty. A sharp, icy dread seized me, spreading through my veins like poison. The realization hit hard. The keys must have fallen out in the lobby with Marvin. With a wave of revulsion, I knew there was no choice but to go back into the storm, back through that sickeningly cheerful lobby filled with smiling clowns and blank-faced Marvin. I steadied myself, gripping the porcelain clown tightly as a weapon as I opened the door to step into the tempest. Outside, the storm had worsened. Lightning splintered across the sky, illuminating the grimy motel courtyard. The neon vacancy sign flickered frantically, casting erratic red shadows across the grotesque clown statues lining the walkway. It felt as if their painted eyes watched every step, their smiles twisted into malevolent sneers. I crept toward the lobby, the wind slicing through my soaked clothing. I almost reached the door when another flash of lightning burst overhead, bathing everything in harsh, surreal clarity. Marvin stood inches away, face nearly pressed against the glass door from the inside, eyes wide and empty. I gasped, stumbling backward as he slowly raised one finger to his lips, forming a silent, bone-chilling shh. Suddenly, the lobby lights blinked out, plunging the motel into complete darkness. Blindly, I lunged away, spinning around, and immediately collided into something tall and solid behind me. Strong, frigid fingers dug painfully into my arms. I screamed as lightning illuminated the figure for one brief, agonizing moment. A towering clown, its face twisted into a grotesque mask, red paint smeared across its lips like fresh blood. Its pale eyes glittered with raw, hungry malice. I wrenched myself free, scrambling back toward my room as the clown let out a nightmarish howl, a wailing laughter echoing through the courtyard, joined now by dozens of other distorted, mocking giggles from unseen figures hidden in the dark. Reaching my door, I slammed it shut behind me, locking and barricading it with every heavy piece of furniture I could drag in front of it. I fell to my knees, trembling uncontrollably, breath coming in short, panicked gasps. As I struggled to regain composure, my gaze drifted upward, and my blood ran cold. Above me, scrawled in dripping red letters across the ceiling, words had appeared where there had previously been nothing. "You're going to smile with us. Forever." Part 3. The painted ones, my lungs burned with every panicked breath, but there was no time for rest. The crimson words on the ceiling seemed to pulse and drip steadily onto the grimy carpet, each droplet falling with a stomach-turning patter. My room was no sanctuary, only a trap closing tighter by the second. With shaking hands, I reached into my pocket for my phone, hoping desperately to find a signal. The screen lit dimly, flickering with static and distortion. My heart sank. The display showed nothing but warped clown faces twisting, shifting, mouths stretching into screams before the phone shut off entirely, plunging me deeper into isolation. A chilling thump echoed through the silence, the sound reverberating from inside the closet behind me. I spun, clutching my makeshift porcelain weapon, dread pooling coldly in my gut. The closet door creaked open a fraction, darkness seeping outward like thick smoke. I forced myself to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who's there?" The closet door swung wide open violently, revealing emptiness at first. But then, slowly, horrifyingly, a figure emerged, crawling out on all fours, limbs twisted at unnatural angles, movements jerky and insect-like. Its pale skin was smeared with peeling clown makeup, an unnatural grin painted crudely across its cracked lips. I staggered backward, tripping and crashing onto the bed as the creature skittered forward, joints clicking and cracking obscenely. It stopped just short of me, tilting its head with a grotesque curiosity. I recognized something familiar in its sunken eyes, a twisted, distorted reflection of something human lost long ago. "Help me," it croaked, voice strangled and broken, pleading behind its horrid grin. "He's watching, always watching." Before I could reply, a sudden deafening banging rattled the walls, violent enough to send paintings crashing to the floor. The creature recoiled, shrieking with a piercing cry that shredded my nerves, scuttling back into the shadows. The banging grew louder, angrier, emanating from the adjoining room. Room 18. My pulse thundered as I pressed my ear against the wall. Through thin, dry wall, muffled screams and sinister laughter blended into a cacophony of madness and despair. I had to escape, had to get away from this nightmare, even if it meant braving the storm and the lurking horrors outside. Swallowing fear, I pushed aside the barricade from my door and burst outside into the rain-soaked walkway. My only hope now, the distant highway beyond the motel grounds. Yet, as I fled through the downpour, icy laughter erupted from every shadow. From behind doorways, between parked cars, and beneath the neon glow, grotesque figures emerged, each painted face more ghastly than the last. They stood motionless, heads slowly turning to follow me, their eyes reflecting sheer emptiness. A shrill giggle echoed loudly from behind me, and I spun to see a clown standing only feet away, its face familiar, the distorted image of Marvin himself. His painted grin stretched impossibly wide, lips cracking open into bleeding wounds as he laughed. "Why are you running?" he rasped, voice scraping painfully against my senses. "You've always belonged here." Behind him, shadows began to gather, taking shape into countless clownish forms, each with outstretched, grasping hands. I had nowhere left to go, trapped in a nightmare come alive. I bolted toward the parking lot, sprinting desperately toward the battered pickup truck, my last chance at escape. Reaching it, I yanked open the driver's door, nearly collapsing into the seat, only to freeze, body paralyzed in horror. On the dashboard lay a bloodied, severed hand gripping tightly my missing car keys. The laughter grew louder, echoing like thunder around me, as countless painted faces pressed closer against the windows, their shrill, mocking giggles drowning out my own screams. Part 4. Buried Smiles. I kicked open the truck door, falling backward onto the pavement, gasping for air as the severed hand and keys landed beside me with a wet smack. Rain stung my face, mixing with tears of terror as I scrambled desperately backward, away from the truck and the twisted faces pressed eagerly against the windows. Their wide, hollow eyes tracked my every move, gleeful and hungry. I ran blindly, stumbling through puddles and past faded clown statues, whose smiles twisted grotesquely beneath flickering lights. My lungs screamed for oxygen, my legs burned, but adrenaline forced me onward toward the darkness beyond the motel's property line. I nearly made it to the tree line before a violent force collided into me from the side, slamming me brutally into the mud. Gasping, my face pressed into the earth, I felt cold fingers wrapped tightly around my wrists, pulling me onto my back. Above me loomed Marvin, his painted smile now smeared and distorted by the rain, peeling like rotting skin from his cheeks. His eyes, previously blank, now burned with a frightening intensity. "Guests never leave," he hissed, his breath foul and coppery, tinged with the unmistakable stench of blood. We all must smile. I struggled violently, kicking and thrashing beneath him. Lightning cracked the sky open, illuminating the forest around us, revealing dozens of shadowy figures standing motionless among the trees. Each wore filthy clown suits, makeup melting down their faces, expressions frozen in grotesque joy. Marvin leaned closer, eyes wide, teeth grinding together. We have waited too long. Our audience grows restless. Let me go, I screamed, kicking hard into his stomach, forcing him off balance. His grip loosened and I scrambled back, clawing my way upright. Behind me lay a narrow path into the trees, barely visible under the moonless sky. Without hesitation, I darted forward, plunging into the dense forest. Branches whipped painfully across my face, roots caught at my ankles, but fear drove me onward. Behind me came laughter, shrill, maddening, approaching rapidly, blending with Marvin's furious shouts. Suddenly, the ground beneath me disappeared, and I plunged forward into open air, falling heavily onto cold, wet soil. I groaned, dazed and breathless, realizing I'd stumbled into a deep, freshly dug hole, a shallow grave. Panic surged through me. I tried desperately to climb out, but the rain-slickened earth crumbled beneath my grasp. Above, silhouetted by intermittent lightning, Marvin and several painted figures gathered at the grave's edge, staring down with chilling, hungry smiles. "You can't escape us," Marvin growled softly, his voice barely audible above the pounding rain. "You'll join them, just like all the others." He stepped back, gesturing towards something behind him. A tall, twisted clown emerged from the shadows, holding a rusted shovel dripping with blood. My stomach churned in horror as the clown plunged it into the dirt, sending heavy clumps cascading down into the hole with me. Dirt piled atop my chest, suffocating me, blinding me, burying me alive. I screamed, choked by earth and despair. My vision blurred as consciousness faded. The last sight burned forever in my mind. A ring of painted faces staring down at me, grinning with vacant, eternal smiles. Then everything went silent, but just as darkness claimed me fully, something grabbed my arm, pulling sharply, violently, wrenching me upward out of the grave. I coughed and gasped, blinking through grime and tears. A shadow stood over me, not Marvin, not the clownish monsters, but someone else. Their face obscured by darkness, the voice urgent yet familiar. "You must hurry," they whispered. "They'll find us soon. There are secrets buried here, and they're dying to keep them hidden." As the mysterious figure dragged me away from my would-be grave, back toward the cursed motel grounds, a sickening realization settled coldly in my chest. The nightmare was only just beginning. My rescuer pulled me swiftly through the shadows toward the motel's decaying outbuildings, careful to stay clear of the grotesque statues and flickering lights that hid watchful eyes. Rain poured relentlessly, each icy drop stinging my skin, reminding me cruelly that this nightmare was horrifyingly real. We finally stopped near an old maintenance shed, its warped walls barely standing beneath creeping vines. My savior shoved open the door, ushering me inside. The air was thick with mold, rust, and something darker, something rancid. In the dim glow of a single bare bulb, I finally saw the face of the person who'd saved me. She was young, face pale and smeared with mud, eyes wide and haunted. Her tangled blonde hair clung to her skin, framing a deep bruise across her cheek. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "They've been waiting for you," she whispered. "They wait for everyone who stops here." "Who are they?" My voice barely worked, raw from screaming. "Why are they doing this?" She shook her head slowly, eyes darting nervously to the boarded window. "It started decades ago. Marvin's grandfather built this place to entertain passing travelers. Clowns were just a gimmick, something to catch attention. But things changed. Changed how? Her eyes darkened. People started disappearing. Guests arrived but never checked out. Everyone thought it was accidents, strangers wandering into the desert, losing their way. But Marvin's family knew better. They were the ones making sure no one left. The shed creaked suddenly, wood groaning under pressure. Her breath quickened, eyes wide in panic. "They're coming. Follow me." She yanked aside a rotted curtain, revealing a trap door hidden beneath. The hinges protested loudly as she opened it, a wave of foul-smelling air flooding upward. My stomach churned, knowing deep in my bones that whatever lay below was worse than anything I'd seen so far. Yet we had no choice. Footsteps approached rapidly outside, wet gravel crunching beneath heavy boots. With a last terrified glance, she descended into the darkness, beckoning for me to follow. Below, we stood in a dirt-floored cellar, lit dimly by a flickering lantern hanging from a rusted hook. The air was rank with decay, and the walls were lined with old photographs, stained and warped by time. I moved closer, my heart racing as I saw the images clearly. They were photos of missing people, travelers, families, countless faces captured in terrified, helpless expressions. Each victim wore grotesque clown makeup, forcibly painted smiles frozen in silent screams. Beneath each picture was a shallow grave marker with names scratched crudely into splintered wood. The girl's voice shook as she spoke again, tears sliding down her pale face. He calls them his collection. Marvin says their laughter keeps the motel alive, but lately it's not enough. He's desperate. He needs more. A sudden bang echoed above us, followed by furious shouting. Marvin's unmistakable voice roared through the floorboards. "You can't hide forever. You'll both join my smiling family." My rescuer grabbed my hand, pointing toward a narrow tunnel carved roughly into the cellar wall. "This leads out behind the motel. It's your only chance." "What about you?" I asked urgently. She gave a bitter, hopeless smile. "I can't leave. I'm already part of this place." Before I could protest, footsteps thundered down into the cellar behind us. She shoved me into the tunnel, screaming, "Run!" I staggered blindly forward, heart tearing as I heard her agonized shrieks behind me, cut suddenly short. Tears blurred my vision as I scrambled onward, desperate to escape the nightmare. The tunnel twisted endlessly, claustrophobic and suffocating, until at last cold night air greeted me as I burst from an opening onto damp earth. Catching my breath, I looked up and realized with horror. I stood at the back edge of the motel grounds. Rows of shallow graves stretched before me, marked crudely by clown shoes, painted faces, and discarded porcelain figures. The entire earth beneath me was alive with buried secrets. A nauseating giggle drifted across the graveyard. I turned slowly, feeling dread seep into my bones. Marvin stood there, waiting calmly, shovel in hand, surrounded by dozens of painted, twisted clowns who rose slowly from their resting places. "Welcome home," Marvin grinned. "It's time to join the others." The clowns advanced steadily, their hollow eyes glittering with joyless laughter. Cornered, surrounded, I realized something horrifying. There truly was no way out. Part 6. The Final Smile. I staggered back, my heart hammering violently against my ribs as the painted figures encircled me, their laughter cold, merciless, closing in from all sides. Marvin stood at the front, his eyes hollow, his smile frozen into a horrible grimace. "It doesn't hurt," Marvin said softly. "After a while, it just feels natural. Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "You don't have to do this." Marvin paused, his eyes flickering briefly with something softer, regret or perhaps sorrow. "I have no choice. The smiles demand it." The clowns drew nearer, their giggles echoing around me, growing louder, drowning out even the rain. My foot bumped against something solid hidden in the wet grass, an old shovel, rusted but strong. Desperation surged inside me, and I snatched it, gripping it tightly. "If I'm going down," I whispered, "I'm taking your twisted smiles with me." I swung the shovel wildly, striking one of the painted horrors squarely in the head. To my shock, the porcelain mask cracked, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Beneath, instead of gore or decay, was pure darkness, shadows spilling outward before dissolving into thin air. A sudden realization surged through me. These weren't monsters, but spirits trapped within cursed masks. Each swing of my shovel shattered another mask, releasing another trapped soul. The clowns recoiled in confusion, their painted grins faltering as hope surged in my chest. "Destroy the masks," a familiar voice shouted from behind me. Turning, I saw the blonde girl from earlier, her face bruised but determined. She lunged forward, wielding a heavy branch and smashing another mask, freeing yet another trapped soul. Marvin watched, frozen, eyes went in disbelief as the nightmare he'd upheld for decades crumbled around him. He dropped to his knees, the shovel slipping from his grip. "Forgive me," he whispered brokenly. "Please forgive me." The girl rushed to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You were trapped too. It's over now." One by one, the clown figures shattered, their painted smiles fading away into whispers of relief. Slowly, as the last mask fell, the storm ceased, clouds parting to reveal stars shimmering gently overhead. The off-highway motel now stood quiet, bathed in soft moonlight, no longer sinister, merely old and abandoned. Marvin rose slowly, face washed clean by rain and tears. "They're free," he murmured softly, disbelief turning into quiet gratitude. "We're all finally free." Suddenly, headlights pierced through the darkness, illuminating us in a warm, golden glow. A convoy of police cruisers barreled into the parking lot, lights flashing red and blue, sirens piercing the silence. The girl stepped toward me, relief clear in her exhausted eyes. "I called them earlier," she whispered. "I wasn't sure they'd believe me, but they came." Officers approached cautiously, stunned by the strange scene, their faces illuminated with confusion but also a profound sense of relief. Marvin offered no resistance, willingly stepping toward them, ready to finally lay his secrets bare and begin atoning for the years he'd lost to darkness. As paramedics tended our wounds, the blonde girl turned to me, smiling faintly, a genuine smile free of terror. "It's over now," she assured me softly. "We made it." Days later, news spread rapidly. Authorities uncovered decades of evidence, finally bringing peace to countless families desperate for answers. Marvin, instead of imprisonment, received treatment, redeemed by the tragedy that had bound him for years. Weeks later, as I packed my car to leave town, ready to finally move past this nightmare, a small faded photograph fluttered out of my jacket pocket. It was Marvin, young and smiling genuinely, a carefree teenager long before evil touched him. Scribbled on the back in gentle handwriting was a single sentence: "Thank you for giving us our smiles back." I smiled softly, peace filling my heart at last. Driving away down the sunlit highway, I glanced into the rearview mirror. No clowns, no ghosts, just quiet emptiness behind me. But just as I turned my eyes back to the open road, I caught the faintest whisper, warm and genuine in my ear. "Thank you."